are so glad that you have come back for another episode of The Glass House with Ben and Lindley Mandrell. I'm Angie Elkins, producer of the show, and today we are live from New Orleans. Some of you may have been able to attend the SBC this summer in New Orleans, and you may have come by the Lifeway store and saw that we were recording live right there with some of you. So today on the show, we've got Landon and Tara Dowden sharing their biggest mistakes, along with our friends Chris and Libby Philips. So we've got two couples here ready to share with you. Guys, we're learning from each other's mistakes. That's the whole reason we're doing this, and we are so glad you have joined us. Okay, friends, here are Ben and Lindley Mandrell.
We are live from New Orleans at the Southern Baptist Convention. Lindley, this is different.
We are inside a glass house in the Lifeway studio, so you will hear background noise during these
the Lifeway
recordings.
Store. There's customers everywhere buying books.
Oh, did I not say the Lifeway store?
You said studio.
Oh, my fault.
I think it works, and the Lifeway store is where you can buy things here, but otherwise you can go to lifeway.com. Did you see what I did there?
I see what you did there. And so we invited you guys in. We've talked to other guests and just said the whole purpose of this is that if you could kind of a dear younger me moment, if you could go back in time and do some things again differently, what would you do? So introduce yourselves a little bit, and maybe, I know, Landon, you're going to kick it off. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, we're Landon and Tara Dowden. We live in Decula, Georgia, and serve at Hebron Baptist Church. Have 4 wonderful gifts from the Lord, ranging from college to just finished elementary. And so full throttle with regard to those things. And we're glad to be here. Thank you guys for letting us air out our mistakes. For me, one of the first mistakes, and it's sort of a combo, of not deciding early enough whom I was okay disappointing. Or the other way I phrase it is not learning soon enough to rest in the gospel. So as I do student camps, I try to encourage them, hey, we've got to learn to not just receive the gospel, but then rest in the gospel. That when we rest in the approval that comes from God and Jesus, then we won't seek it everywhere else. And then instead of trying to impress everybody, which is easy, I just came from an executive committee meeting. I'm in rooms where we may always want to try to impress people. But when we rest in the gospel, instead of trying to impress them, we'll be set free to serve them. And I think early enough, I didn't learn that. I knew that I didn't want to disappoint Tara, our children. I didn't want to disappoint them spiritually with sin. So that was clear. But learning the balance then, too, of how to find that rhythm to protect our family time. But then also just learning there were just going to be some people who were never going to be pleased. And to say to some folks, it seems that everything I do disappoints you, and this may not be the faith family where you can flourish. And it is always grieving to me when people leave, but learning to be okay to say that after you've tried to exhaust every sort of pastoral approach in that. And so just for me, if I would go back, younger me, Ed Welch's book, When People Are Big and God is Small, certainly a helpful book when we begin to think about not wanting to disappoint God foremost. But I wish I would have learned a little sooner and earlier to rest in the gospel.
So were there times when you were a younger pastor where you would try to hang on to someone and compromise your beliefs or values almost to keep them at your church versus saying, I think there's another faith family for you?
Yeah, I think Tara would say all the time, she is a good check for me of whether I'm trying to please people or please the Lord. Mm. And I think that I wanted to hold on to everybody. Yeah. And while I was never fully tempted to transgress convictions from the word, we don't have authority to do that. In all the other ways, I could maybe hit mute on some things to keep as many journeying along together as possible. There would constantly be a temptation to do that pragmatically, and have to come back and be reminded we can't cross that boundary.
I would say you're probably willing to sacrifice sometimes family and time, maybe to invest in that person.
Yes.
But really, there's a choice that's already made, and ultimately, the Lord maybe has a shifting and a plan for His church, and so, but maybe you're trying to,
Yeah.
gone. But you definitely never sacrifice your convictions on the word.
No.
Yeah.
No, not that.
I was thinking about this very thing recently. I preached the book of Esther in the story of Haman
Yeah.
and how he was consumed by one person's approval.
Yes.
Mordecai.
Yeah.
He could not believe that this one guy wasn't giving him the respect.
Yeah.
And the reason we love villains in stories is there's always a part of that villain that we see ourselves in there. And I was preparing that message and I was like, there have been so many seasons in my life where there's been one church member
Yes.
or one person that I'm like, I'm going to win them over.
Yes.
And it became my pursuit
Yes.
above all other things.
Yeah.
And what is that? That's just idolatry.
Absolutely.
Like I'm now wanting the approval of this one person even more than I am of God.
Yes. And I think the reality is it just may never come. And if we have been faithful and we've exhausted our efforts to try to bridge gaps, united around the gospel, there are just some folks who just don't like you. And we have to learn to rest then in the gospel to say, hey, I'm sorry. Whatever it is about me that you just don't like, without letting that consume and destroy and then cause bitterness for all the other people who you get to joyfully shepherd and cause problems in that.
I'm going to steal his line. I steal your lines all the time.
I know you do.
Everything I'm doing seems to disappoint you.
Yeah.
What a great lead into a humble conversation about, is this working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes it's just not working.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a staff person where you always have to convince them that your decision is right, or a church member that wants a meeting every time that is really good language. I'm stealing that.
You're welcome.
I'm doing.
Freely did it come to me one day, and then to be able to employ that, in a conversation. But the Lord brought freedom, to clarity. It's freely yours. So.
Awesome.
All right, Tara,
Tara, how about
your
you?
turn.
Let me introduce myself because I like to do that. And that's going to my first point. No, we joke because Landon never introduces me. He just did it a minute ago. He introduced Nathan, our executive pastor, the work wife, and literally did not introduce me. But I always say it's because he doesn't want people to realize how great that I
That's
am.
it.
That's right.
That's what it is.
right.
This leads into
That's
my
what
first.
it is.
But I'm Tara. I'm Landon's wife, mom of Arabella Adelaide, Adoniram, and Alistair, who I adore, and then right now serving as women's minister at Hebron Baptist Church as well.
As the women's minister, is that a paid position?
It is a paid position now.
How did that
that was
happen
hard.
within the church? Because I know that's so hard. A lot of times the congregation assumes that you should just do it for free.
Right.
Or that you're greedy for asking for money.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So the way it happens at our church, honestly, I'm solely responsible for the hiring or firing. In this case, our leadership team, which is comprised of 3 of our executive staff and then 5 to 6 lay people, and then our finance team, and then even the lead team of the staff. I shared with them, this is my desire. Tara will do that, but if we would pay someone else for doing that same job, why would we not also pay her? But I remove myself from the rest of any of the decision-making process and let them carry that out to say, here's where we fall on those things. And even right now, as they go through that, it's our lead team guys that advocate. I remove myself because we don't want nepotism
Conflict of
or
interest.
inappropriate. And in the end, I never forget that we're going to give an account to the chief shepherd. So in all the ways that we operate, but at the same time, if she was not married to me and she was doing this position, she would be paid by another faith family, or if it wasn't her, we would be paying someone else.
Right.
And so in the sense of those
But here's my
things-
question. What if they'd said no?
Yeah. Well, I think that we would just know, okay, it's the Lord's timing. And so we'll shift to something else. In the past, for 16, 17 years, I have always been volunteer in any areas we needed. We've been in 2 church plants.
We've been in 2 church plants.
And then in this church. And so I would, raising children, along with raising children and doing about 3 part-time jobs, I would always volunteer with the areas we needed: children's ministry, youth ministry, women's ministry. It was a little bit overwhelming, but it was fine. I enjoyed it. It was my therapy. And so, but this time around, I was teaching school actually full-time and in Gwinnett County during COVID. And so I was teaching in person and digital at the same time. Very, very overwhelming. And then doing this job, taking care of the women's ministry. And I finally just said, I cannot do this. So as a family, we have to decide, do we want to be in the school system? I also was working on some design aspects of the church, or do you want me to be in women's ministry? And I basically said, if you value me and my time and my giftings, you will make a choice towards this, or at least put it before the church, because I cannot volunteer anymore. I can't do it well and volunteer. And the way our church is set up, even the church staff was saying, you've got to be in here with us. This is not just communication-wise, all those kind of things, logistics. I could not do them well with as many people as we are serving.
Right.
So in this situation, and I said, I don't want to push this, because if it's not going to work, it's fine.
Right.
So I'm not going to push this, but I have to say to you, you're going to have to find another volunteer, or you can choose to hire me. I cannot do it as a volunteer
Good for you.
anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
You just drew that boundary.
It
You're like,
wasn't. It just didn't work.
It's either a paid position or I'm out.
Right, because it just didn't work well. It wasn't working well.
That's good.
And in the past, they had some ministers' wives, pastors' wives who had served, and so it wasn't as big. So for my first one, and really y'all just saw it happen, it was pride. Because, when you sent me the text and said, we'd love for you to talk about mistakes, I'm like, oh, great. But I sent back and said, what mistakes? So I think that pride and self-reliance is a huge one, because I've had just some really sweet opportunities to do some leadership things over the years. So really I could create a good plan for a ministry, but it's not even about that. We heard Paul Tripp speak recently. He said, you're always building a kingdom. It's either your kingdom or God's kingdom. And so it's so easy to just do your thing and maybe come up with a plan and build a plan. But really, it's about God's kingdom and what does He want for His church? What does He want specifically? And this is even a bigger deal. What does He want actually for the church and the community you are living in at that time that He has called you to? And that's big. And that's where I think you just have to continually go back to the Lord and be in prayer and find accountability, find friends who, and this is probably mistakes that I've not done before. If someone corrects me, do I necessarily run to that person and say, okay, I need you in my life? Maybe I'll run away, but maybe I needed that correction and that help and that accountability while I'm serving in a ministry area. So that was my first one, is pride and just this self-reliant. Instead of really being like, it's God's kingdom, I have to rely on the Lord fully for everything that we're thinking through or planning or praying over, and then be okay with how He works and moves.
C.S. Lewis said pride is spiritual cancer. It eats away at every ounce of contentment in a person's life.
Absolutely.
So what moments can you think of when your pride was so present? Like, is there a story of where you just became aware that you're being very prideful in the church?
I think probably pushing through on maybe a ministry plan when it wasn't really the right time, or we should step back and say, this isn't it yet, and even in team settings and bringing teams and maybe thinking that my plan is the best plan when it's others. Maybe the Lord is using others who's on that team or in that plan to bring that about, and just stepping back, putting myself to the side. I don't know if that's specific enough.
Tara is very secure because her father was supportive and strong. So she is a great leader, and sometimes in patiently waiting to bring everyone else along in that, or to even rely on them, she'll just work through. She'll work through, and so in some ways of that, there's a strength, and then it can also be a problem, But
so one of my best friends from Louisiana, her husband named us the bulldozers, and so she will always kind of say, if I'm talking about something with her or working things out with her, she'll just say, okay, are you bulldozing through this? Are you stepping back and just waiting and loving people well and being patient in the process of developing this ministry, And so many times I have bulldozed through.
Well, this one, if I were speaking to younger me, it would be not to post everything you think on social media, right? Especially if you were going to post about the preacher while he is preaching, and you have been a guest preacher at his church all weekend. Wow. Yeah. You did that. Yeah. So, you asked us to be real. It doesn't get a lot realer than this. I had served not just that year, but a previous year, and And I think I had some, I don't think, I had some philosophical differences. And so I tweeted a couple of statements, pontificating, but also knowing where I was. Ended up some staff spouses actually liked those posts, so that wasn't helpful for that current ministry. And so I'm not thinking anything about it. I'm in Dallas airport flying back, and the student minister says, "Hey man, did you post something earlier today?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, that wasn't very helpful." And so as I began to evaluate that, I totally agreed that it was not. And I actually called that lead pastor and apologized to him and sought his forgiveness. And he said, hey, I think we just have a different approach in style. And I still disagreed with that. I think there was still a different conviction about substance, but I should not have handled that in that way. In the Lord's grace, that group still came to a camp that I pastored for Lifeway later in that summer, and so we didn't lose any clients or customers. But in that way, for me, immaturity at that moment, probably pride also of, even if it is the right way, if you handle it in the wrong, if it's the right thing, but you handle it in the wrong way. But there was a growth in seeking a brother's forgiveness, not just ignoring it, not just deleting and thinking that would be okay, right? It was certainly something that left a mark, and it's been a conversation for those that have been involved. We still remember it. It's been multiple years now. But I would tell my younger self, be careful in what you post and when you post and why you post, even if you think it's the right thing to post.
We all post or say things sometimes that 5 minutes later are like, what was that felt like a good idea at the time.
Yes.
But the fact that you went to the lead pastor and sought his forgiveness is a differentiator for me. Like, a lot of people won't do that. They'll just say, well, it was the truth.
Yeah.
Or, I didn't say anything that wasn't what other people were thinking. But for you to step up and say, I was out of line, and I love your language again. I need to seek your forgiveness.
Yes.
Because I think so much of staying in ministry is being willing to seek forgiveness when you screw up. Absolutely.
I talk about it all the time with students too, as we make disciples, right? Paul, when he had that last moment with the leaders from Ephesus, and he met with them at Miletus, he says, you know how I lived. So here you have Paul the teacher, but he doesn't appeal to a lesson, he appeals to his life. And we sometimes only hold people at bay. I think one of the most profitable lessons for one of our interns who then became a staffer was when Tara and I had a disagreement while we were hosting our staff and spouses, and then they got to see
a little bit. It was a big one.
But they got to see, what does that look like in the next moment?
Yeah.
Do we seek reconciliation? How do we work it out? Do we communicate? Do we just shut down? And so we often don't.
Today, I'll expect you to go ahead and come to me
and say you were right.
Remember?
You're right.
You're right.
Let's go back to your point number one. What was it again?
Pride.
Not pride.
So in that, we don't want people to see where we are in those things, and yet what they need to see is our progress in the gospel. Our full perfection in the gospel isn't coming to glorification anyway. And
We
so they
talked
need
about-
to see this.
Sorry.
No, yeah.
Thought you were done. We talked about this in our relationship recently, because Lindley and I both have a tendency in the moment to say more than we should.
Yes.
I don't know that that's actually going to change.
Yes.
What I do hope changes is that we're quicker to repent.
Yes.
You come back and say, you know what, in the heat of the moment I said this, it's not true.
Absolutely.
I was mad, I was trying to hurt you. I do think we're growing in that regard. We still have our blow-ups.
I'm not sure I'm in full agreement of that. I've got a text I could read from a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
So yes,
Of all the things that I was mad at you about.
there was a list.
And did I not apologize for that list?
Not until I asked for it.
Were there points and subpoints or just points?
There
It was pretty lengthy. I was pretty mad.
It was
Yeah.
pretty lengthy. So
Yeah.
anyway, but no, I'm kidding. We I think just even understanding that, okay, we're both just fighters, and not fighters in a bad way, but just like, I don't
The
even know.
positive side of anger is passion.
Yeah.
passionate.
That is actually a really good thing.
Yeah.
We're both passionate people.
Yes.
So we didn't marry, we're not a laid back person married to a laid back person, which
Oh,
means
We are the
Yes.
same.
Yes.
We are
have
the
to figure
same.
out how that works.
Absolutely.
And let our kids know that we're both passionate people, and sometimes they're going to get caught in the crossfire.
I totally agree with what you said, though, as far as letting people see you fight and letting them see you make up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're that way with our kids and other things. I mean, because I don't want them to grow up and think, well, conflict is bad,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to make it through some conflict.
Our kids have to see me apologize to Tara, and eventually we hope to see her apologize to me. So,
Ridiculous. That's
All right,
actually,
Tara, go on, do your.
That's one of mine, and I put it last, but really it could be first. I wrote down, that just not being supportive of Landon when I'm frustrated with him. So I have a really big issue when I walk into the church, and this, everyone, they love their pastor because they see their pastor teaching them the word and caring for them and shepherding them. And I will say Landon is an excellent shepherd. And he doesn't just pastor and teach and all that, but he's a good shepherd. And so everyone loves him, and they might say, oh, it's so great. I love Landon. So blah, blah. And I want to be like, no, he's not great. And if I feel like that, and we've had a personal interaction where I'm frustrated in different ways, I show it. It's hard for me to just be like, he is amazing.
Yes,
I get so mad, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. He did this and this and this and this. And I've been joking because recently he was studying for some things and upstairs, and I was slaving away in the garage, and I was so mad the whole time. And I was like, if he receives manna from heaven for one more second while I'm slaving away in this garage, I am going to hurt him. Cut off the manna. I was literally praying to the Lord. I was so mad. I was like, Lord, I need to. I'm cleaning the garage, and he's receiving manna from heaven. I'm bringing him coffee, And so I was like, I have to redirect my heart and my mindset. And I want to make sure, and that I really think that is a big one, because we joke and we tease, and we are both very strong. And so sometimes that has come across with church members that I don't support him and I don't love him and I'm rude to him or whatever else. It's not that. It's just that where everything that's coming in my mind and my heart, it shows on my face. And it's hard for me to just be fake about things. And when the kids were little, especially, a pastor's wife really does a lot of single parenting, especially on Sundays. And not throughout the week, but on Sundays, it is hard. We do a lot by ourselves. And when you have a lot of little children, you don't just arrive at church and think, this was a great morning changing everybody's diapers, and I've gotten thrown up on my clothes and I'm supposed to teach Sunday school and blah, blah, blah. It's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so I have definitely made many mistakes where I've just cut him down or been really ugly and rude. And they're feeling like, it's so wonderful, and they're so appreciative, and they're expressing that to me. And in return, I say, I can't stand him right now. And so that came to mind of, that's hurtful in the long run. It's so hurtful. And
on the opposite side of that, the only thing I would say is I love it because Tara's not going to let us pretend to be anything other than we are. So we're never going to be the paid professional fake ministry family. If we're struggling, we're going to be real, and that's useful for our sanctification. But again, I think it's helpful in the people that we shepherd that we're vulnerable. This isn't the only time we'll talk about our mistakes. We try to model vulnerability. And she is not going to pretend so that we can get a paycheck. And I appreciate that. Yeah. It helps us seek to be real and seek reconciliation.
My mom used to say, you tell everybody your sins. And I'm like, well, they probably know them already. They can probably tell the issues that I have. And so, but I am sometimes honest to a fault and hurtful towards him when I'm frustrated.
I want to say something though real quick. We've had somebody that listens to the Glass House who has said, I can't believe, Ben, that you would let her talk to you like that.
Yeah.
So it did. When we received that feedback, I thought, okay, well, we've got to balance our sarcasm with also sweetness and tenderness, so that people do see, hey, they're real, they're authentic, they are going to fight through this, but they do also love each other.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like you,
Yeah.
and so it's hard to to not want to say,
like, I'm loving or teasing him by being like sarcastic and joking. And that's kind of how we have a love language. That's our flirting with each other, but it can come across so ugly. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no,
that's exactly, we
have to watch the same thing, because what's funny to us, other people think, man, they're not jiving.
Yeah.
Every time I talk to you guys, I think more people need to know the Dowdens.
It's
You're so full of life and wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for letting us be here, and we're grateful for you.
We've got Chris and Libby Philips, our friends from Colorado, who are with us. Tell us a little bit about you guys real quick.
Yeah, Libby and I have been married almost 17 years, from Tennessee originally. Moved out to Denver, Colorado, thanks to a church planter there that wouldn't get off my back about coming out there.
What was his name?
Ben Mandrell.
He's a visionary.
I've heard of him.
And we moved out in 2017, residented, then planted in 2019, and then took on a location in 2021. And
awesome.
So, God's been good. 4 kids, 14, 12, 10, and
You
6.
took my part.
Sorry.
Libby, tell us about Sonic drinks.
Oh man, they're my favorite.
You have
can
one every
catch
day?
me with them. Yeah. I'm down to like 3 days a week, instead of 7.
I love that about you.
I have a real full-time job, so that kind of like puts that in perspective.
What do you do? Tell everybody what you do.
I am actually a teacher, work at elementary school. I have a new role and do reading intervention and literacy coaching now. So
awesome.
You did work on staff when you moved out there with Chris.
I did. We worked real closely. He was my boss, and until he fired me about 2.5 years in, he likes to tell everybody he fired me. I was over our children's with the church plant for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I tell Ben he's fired me sometimes, because he'll be like, I have a great idea for you. And then a few weeks later, I'm like, did you fire me?
Did you?
I like to fire her and rehire her.
Yeah.
Pretty often, actually.
Chris, we have something in common.
What's that?
When people meet our wives, they look at us and think they must have good personalities.
100%. Yeah. The out kicking my coverage is a common phrase I hear.
No.
All right. So here's the topic. Go ahead. Lay it out, Lindley.
So we are gathering worst mistakes that people have made in ministry. We're kind of marketing this as in, if you were in seminary now, what do you wish you would have learned? And so things along the way that you thought, gosh, I wish somebody would have told me that.
That's good.
Or given me a heads up that this is a really hard thing to lead. So we're just gathering those from people and thought perhaps you guys could share some wisdom.
How much time do we have? I've got quite a lot.
We can edit you down.
You're going to need to.
Who's going to go first?
Ladies first, always.
No, you're going first.
Okay. It's as I was thinking about this, I do have a lot. I think the one that's probably the most painful for me has been recently, and it's you don't really walk through like leading team when they walk through life circumstances and things that walk through. And so we had a couple of years ago, we had a team member that was walking through a life circumstance that needed some attention and taken care of, and I didn't handle that well walking through it, because you learn how to counsel people in your church, learn how to walk through that. But now you're looking at a church plant, and you're looking at things have to run, and you're looking at you don't have a huge team, and all this other kind of stuff. And so we had someone that walked through something, and then that didn't go well with me leading it personally, but then also trying to manage the rest of the team while this person was walking through this situation. And that person chose some anonymity from what was going on in his circumstances, and was like super quiet about it. And I kind of had to divulge a little bit because there were some just assumptions about what was going on. And so I'm trying to protect one side over here from everybody thinking that something is really bad, but then also kind of betraying the trust of someone that's walking through something while also trying to lead a team. So I'm trying to walk with someone on the team through a tough situation while also leading a team over here that has no idea. And I just didn't handle it the best. And it really, cut some friendships and some relationships that are there and not there now. And we're working through some, process of restoration very, very slowly. But I'd say that's probably been the most hurtful, painful, and that's on me. It's all on me. I mean, I should have kept all of that.
So did that person find out that you had told some information?
Yeah, that person found out that I divulged more than I should have. Okay. And in a way, I felt like I was trapped, but I wasn't. I should not have. And so that person found out, and not only did it hurt him, it hurt his family, it hurt that situation, and then that ultimately hurts the church. That hurts so many different, variables and layers that are there. And so, then, my team felt better, but it was at the cost of a relationship over here. And so it's probably one of the biggest failures I've walked through recently that hurt Yeah,
It makes
and I
me
didn't
think.
handle it well.
It makes me think about the episode we did with R.T. Kendall on total forgiveness.
Yeah.
And how all of us are called to completely forgive those we've wounded and been wounded by in the past.
Yeah.
Even as you tell that story, it makes me think about people in my past that I've been praying about. How do I go back and restore? Yeah. You know, Paul calls it the ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah.
But it's hard because there's baggage, there's pain, there's like it almost needs counseling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
what did you think about when he's saying that?
I mean, I just think that is so hard. We were talking about this recently in that when you have to give, how are we saying? Oh, we were talking about the convention and how, you know, Ben will stand up there and have like 3 minutes and people can ask him whatever question they want. Well, that is so hard because there is months of conversations and prayer and decisions. And so even with this situation you're going through, I understand why you feel stuck because you have so much more information than these other people had. Yeah. And you do have to share some of it or they think that you're like a, you know, responsive or like reactive leader and not thinking through things. But so it is hard. I mean, you're just kind of in a catch-22 of what do I share?
Yeah. Okay, so if you could go back and do it again, is there a thing or two you would tell people, like, here's what I wouldn't do again?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I would have kept 100% of the anonymity and just told people, hey, you know, I wish I could tell you more, I divulge more information, but I literally can't. Just know that everything is okay. Now, you know, earlier, like I was saying, I felt like that person should have handled a little bit, but didn't. Mm-hmm. But that was me.
It wasn't yours to tell.
It wasn't mine to tell. And it wasn't me to tell him when it was okay for him to tell anybody. And so if I could go back, I would just 100% keep that anonymity, keep that trust. Because again, I mean, it hurt just more than just him, different relationships. And I would have just let my team, I probably would have told my team, hey, do you trust me? Like at any point up to this point, have you not had trust for me? And they haven't, right? It's not like they've had any reason not to trust me for anything. I would have just looked at them and said, hey, just trust me on this. I don't want to divulge any information, and this is where it would be.
It's hard to say, though.
It is.
You're asking people to believe in something. They don't have the information. You got to have some capital built up.
It was tough. Yeah. It was a tough situation for me. Still tough. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Libby's turn.
You're up.
My turn. I think mine is a little bit more vague. So a little bit about our backstory. We didn't grow up in church, so moving out to church planning and me for the first time being pastor's wife. Mm-hmm. Like you are the lead pastor, I'm pastor's wife. I did not have a definition. Well, I did have a definition in my brain. It's like what a pastor's wife looked like. And I didn't fit into that. And so I think one of my just general life mistakes is saying yes too fast or saying yes to lots of things and not really looking at where I should say no.
That's good.
That's good.
And so I think, and that can go lots of different directions and snowballs.
Is there a time that you did that where you think I should have said no?
What have I got myself into?
I do it often. That's kind of the problem.
That's my thing.
That's sort of my thing.
I love to overcommit.
I love to overcommit. I really think one of the biggest things is early on, and this kind of continued for the first several years of leading our team and like me feeling like I needed to fill the women's ministry role. Yeah. I needed to lead women's ministry. I needed to provide that for our whole church. But I was also leading kids, which with my degree and like my passion, that's kind of my thing is kids. And I feel confident in that. But really trying to lead our women well. And that just wasn't my calling. It just really wasn't, yes, I was a pastor's wife, but it just really wasn't I'm not going to be the one that's going to lead or teach through our Bible studies. And I think ultimately that hurt. That failed that I put myself in a position to be that person when that just wasn't my thing. I mean, it really wasn't.
Totally. You know what that makes me think of is Vicky's talk about over-functioning.
Yeah.
Vicky Gray talked about early on as a pastor's wife, she would say yes to everything.
Anything.
In her over-functioning, she was actually robbing other people of what they were called to do because she was filling that role.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, because you fill the role and then they're like, oh, well, that's her job. I don't need to do that, or I don't need to say that I have a calling or a passion for this. And then ultimately, too, that hurts our marriage, our family, because if I'm doing 6 things and I don't have the capacity to, bring our kids along, or, when we stepped into the Riverside position, I finally, for the first time, was like, I'm going to say no, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to step in and just be the pastor's wife.
Yeah.
Except a couple of months ago, she didn't adhere to that.
Well,
Hold
that was
on,
your
hold
fault.
on.
Hold on, that was your fault.
Listeners, this just in. Chris and Libby were planting a church and decided to take on another church. And so now he's pastoring two churches that are one church, and Libby's has decided not to sign up for everything in the second church.
In the second church, I said no.
Just want to catch you guys up.
But I found myself on Sunday mornings getting there and like feeling really guilty or weird, just sitting and listening to him preach.
Interesting.
I totally get that.
Very guilty. But it was some of the most fulfilling, and I see that now. On the flip side, our children's director moved, and so nobody had children. So I kind of had to interim. For the interim, we just hired, so we're good. But then stepping out of service and not being in there, and like, I love hearing my pastor preach. Love. And I think that was something that, when I was saying yes to all these different things, I wasn't in there and I couldn't support him. I couldn't pray for him, before. I think that was one of the things I felt most guilty about is Sunday mornings, you get up and like, I'm running this direction, you're running this direction. Our kids are running around with who knows who.
We hope we have them.
Yeah, we hope they're all four there. But, your mind's on one thing. And ultimately, I would have loved to even have 2 minutes to stop, pray for him before he's getting up there to preach. And I didn't. Yeah. So it hurt that as well.
Our first Easter, when Ben was not a pastor, people would ask, do you want to, in our church, I was kind of like, I should volunteer. I know I should volunteer, but we were still just really grieving. And so we went to church and sat there, and it was the most enjoyable Easter service I've ever been to. I feel like it was the first. Because you weren't
evaluating it.
I wasn't like, how are things going in the kids area? Yeah. How's the parking going? How's everything? The things you just think about, even if that's not your role, like when your husband's the pastor, you're just processing it, especially in church planning, when everybody's doing everything. And so, I sat there and thought, I'm actually understanding what the message of Easter is, because I'm not stressed about everything else. So I said no. It was that Sunday I thought, I know I should volunteer. I can't. I just need a break this one Sunday.
Well, the other thing too is church people can be really judgy about your kids. So like if you've got one that's been acting up and you're over here in this area and you don't you're nervous about how this one's behaving. Yeah. And so you're torn between two things. Yeah. It's hard.
Oh, we totally, man. We were like 2 weeks into Riverside, new church, we're the new people, we have all the 4 kids. And I had stepped out to meet somebody. So I'm in lobby. And an older lady comes out with 2 of our kids, and they'd gotten in a fist fight.
Oh, no.
On the front row.
It's awesome.
Fighting over, I had stepped out, but they were fighting over who was going to sit next to me. I'm like, oh, good. Thanks for.
They love me.
Yep. Thanks for setting it.
What did she say to you? How she handled it?
Well, so she was a teacher, which helped. Okay. But she stepped out and she was like, I had to remove them, because they are fighting over who is going to sit next to you. And it started to get quite aggressive. And I was like, okay, wait, talk to me real here. And she was like, they were in a fist fight.
This all ties together too with what Libby said. From a life experience, I often wonder if I'm messing up my kids by being a church planter and taking on a lot. It keeps me up at night. Yeah. And I'm going, I brought them into this culture where 95% of people are spiritually disconnected from Christ and I'm doing it on the vein of mission, right? And I think one of my biggest weaknesses is I can say yes to a lot of things and run over people in the vein of mission to accomplish something. And I forget that people are the mission. And so I encourage Libby to say yes, because, hey, this will help the mission move forward, and so ultimately it's my problem, right? My weakness.
So we're really good for each other.
Yeah, right. It's not, but then you can look at your kids and go, okay, and even they're missionaries. And I'm like, my kids are not spiritually formed enough to be missionaries in the Denver culture, but I probably have thought too much about them being missionaries in the Denver culture. And even with that, you go back to it and it's like, oh my goodness, we moved out here, we planted a church, we took on a second location downtown. I'm preaching at both of these and I'm dragging my kids along in every single one of these areas. And so that's been a huge weakness of saying yes to too many things and not even thinking about the people that are in the wake, that they're just kind of dead bodies in the wake, right? That are there.
I think early on, we probably did put a lot more pressure on our kids. And we would say, you're a part of this too, which it is true. We did this as a family.
Oh, man.
But leaning heavy into the stories of we have a story early on of Tripp, our oldest, who shared about our church with his bus driver and was like, you should come one week.
Oh, yeah.
Which we were like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. But then he hears that and is like, okay, that's what I should do.
Yeah.
And it just puts a
approval.
lot.
He's immediately saying.
Yeah. And so then it just puts so much pressure on them.
Lindley, I'm so dumb. I'd be like, okay, when we invite our neighbors over who are all spiritually disconnected from Christ, hey, when they come over, if they see you acting like a fool, how is that going to help them hear the gospel? And I'm like, did I really? I really just did that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
I love the idea that people are the mission.
Oh, man.
I think that's a cool topic to chase sometime. I think we forget that the people are the mission.
Yeah.
I use people to get the mission and forget that people are the mission too often.
Totally.
And I run over people and
how would
tough.
you change that if you could?
With
your personality?
Honestly, this even goes back. I mean, you guys planted a church, I probably didn't. I forgot that everybody that helped us plant the church, they were removed from their spiritual community from where they were. And then I immediately just wanted them to go and reach lost people instead of really nurturing their souls spiritually. And so if I could change that, I would really take way more time, really encouraging them. We lost a lot of people on our core team. And I don't think it was because of me or my leadership or anything, but they were so disconnected from what they had for years before. And in Denver, they weren't going to gain that back quickly, but I didn't care. I really just wanted to reach my neighbors who none of them know Christ. And so it was like, golly, why couldn't I have just taken an extra Tuesday and spent that time with them instead of in the coffee shop meeting,
I get it.
unchurched people. And,
easy mistake to make though.
And so, I think for me, because I'm naturally, I see a big room and I want to see everybody in the room and then I want to connect everyone. And that's not, I don't think inherently bad, but there's also the people that see a big room and then they just want to have the deep conversation with the one. So I'm trying to get them connected so that someone can help them in that way. But I need to take time to be present with the person in front of me and to have that conversation with the person in front of me. And I don't do that often enough. Yeah.
I think the temptation, though, to give you the benefit of the doubt is that when people move with you to church plant, you think that because they're spiritually stable, they're okay.
Yeah.
They can do it on their own. And, the mission was not for us to come out here and form a Bible study. It's to me. So there is grace in that it has to be both and. You do have to reach others too.
Thanks for joining us today, friends. We hope that as you have listened to today's biggest mistakes, you've been inspired by the authenticity and vulnerability of these two couples, and we'd love to hear from you. What mistakes have you made that you've learned from? So write us at president@lifeway.com and let us know what are some of the biggest mistakes you've made in life or in ministry.
The Glass House is a production of Lifeway, produced and edited by Angie Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, original music by Robert Elkins, photography by Rebecca McVeigh, and artwork by Heather Brzezinski. We are your hosts, Ben and Lindley Mandrell. Thanks for listening.